Welcome back to the Why Mindset Matters podcast. I'm Eslana Loa. I'm a speaker, author, resilience mindset coach. I'm a nurse, a midwife, and a mother of four. And if this is somehow the first episode of mine that you have found, I do want to provide a trigger warning. I do discuss the loss of my teenage daughter, Riley, to suicide. Today, I just want to have a really honest, maybe even confronting conversation about something that's at the root of so much of our pain, and that's attachment. And I'm not just talking about relationships here. I know that is a big part of it, and I'm seeing a lot of people in close proximity to me really struggle with the suffering associated with attachment to relationships, or especially in the dissolution of those relationships. But I'm talking about attachment to outcomes, to identities and to roles and to control, essentially, and how we think our life was supposed to go. So this is for anyone who's ever gripped so tightly to something or someone only to have it all slip through your fingers and wonder why it hurts so deeply. I know that that's how I lived with the suffering that attachment facilitates in so much of my life. After a childhood riddled with abuse and neglect and no certainty or control, it led me into my teenage years and early adulthood a control freak. Just so much attachment, how I believed things were supposed to look or go or feel, or, this need for control was at the core of my nervous system seeking safety, 100%, because I'd never been safe in my life. And now I figured if I could just control all of these aspects or whatever it was in my life, then I would somehow be safe, or things would somehow be certain and as I expected them to be, and it's very much not the case. But one of the core teachings of Buddhism says that attachment is the root of all suffering. And I used to hear that and think, how can I not be attached to the people that I love? How can I, to the life that I've worked for? Or, isn't caring the same as attaching? And it's an uncomfortable realization often to have that attachment isn't love, it's control. And it's the fear underneath love that says, I need this to stay exactly as it is in order for me to be okay. And when, not if, but when life changes or people leave or things fall apart or whatever happens, and your life unfolding may look nothing like mine, but it will present its challenges and life will change. And there are people that will leave your life. People are in and around our lives sometimes for just seasons of it. And there might be people we were convinced were going to be here for longer for whatever reason. And I don't just mean for absence facilitated by death. Things don't always work out the way that we thought that they were supposed to or going to. And our suffering gets magnified, not just by the loss itself, but by the resistance we have to it, because we hold so tightly to this need for or perception of control, because the control isn't real. And I know when I lost Riley, everything I was attached to shattered. My version of motherhood that I had imagined, the future that I dreamed of, the identity that I had as her mum, as a mum, in the identity I had in this world and physically. And everything shattered. My whole world as I knew it. And in those first waves of grief, I realized how attached I was to this perception of permanence, to the perception of control and to certainty. And I say perception because there's no permanence in life. There is actually very little control and there's no certainty. Life doesn't promise us certainty. And the reality is there's so much that happens in and around our lives that we have no control over. Life, what it does promise us is change. That's a given. And we either learn to ride the waves or we actually drown fighting the current. And I think I look back and realize I spent most of my life just trying not to drown because I was fighting. I was fighting this current that I look back with such pity really on the younger version of myself that was so ill prepared for the realities of life. And it's like being thrown in the ocean and never even being taught how to swim. It just felt like that. It felt like a constant battle of survival, and learning how to loosen my grip and in doing so know that it doesn't mean that I loved less. It started to mean that I actually love more genuinely and freely and without needing to possess or fix or control or freeze frame life into something that I thought was safe, and in doing so just keeps you small. And it keeps the capacity that we have to experience all the beauty and all the love and all that life has to offer so small comparatively to how big it should be when we start to loosen our grip. But if we think about it like this, attachment says, I can't live without this. And freedom says, I can love fully and survive the loss. And I remember in our early days of our relationship and feeling so overwhelmed by how much we loved each other, and we would say, I could never live without you. And we thought it was such a deep, as kids, young adults, like such a deep love that was overwhelming us and making the idea of living without this person feel insurvivable. But it was, looking back, we were codependent, we were enmeshed. It wasn't love, and I don't mean that we didn't love each other, but it wasn't the experience of love that we thought we were having. Now being on the flip side of living previously in an attachment, saying I can't live without you, now being in the freedom that says I can fully love you and survive the loss if there was one. But I think presence, I think being able to live really intentionally and really present is what facilitates the capacity to live in the absence of the things or the people that you love so much, because you get to navigate the inevitable grief and loss associated with the absence of the things or the people that you love, free from guilt and regret and remorse that says, oh my God, I wish I'd done more, said more, been more present, or wasn't so unkind. And I think that when I reflect on even the difference that presence that I brought to my parenting and my relationship with and to Riley is what facilitated the ability to navigate grief and loss, as I said, free from the added layers that I think would have destroyed me. But it doesn't mean you stop caring. It means that you actually care without fear. And I can 100% relate to that. It's so nice to not be living in so much fear. And that's where the need for control comes from. It's that we are so scared of not having control that we grip so tightly to the things or the people or the relationships or the identity or whatever it is, but we can't even see that we can hold those very things with open hands, not clench fists, and that clenching our fists around it and, needing that control doesn't facilitate certainty, doesn't keep those things in close proximity or in your life. If anything, it sabotages the opportunity you have to fully experience all the beauty that whatever it is that you love has to offer. And so when I reflect on what it looks like to move from attachment to presence, it's letting go of needing closure before healing. It's, releasing the story of how I think it should have been and being with what is instead of resisting what's not. And then trusting that my peace doesn't depend on anyone else staying or changing. And these are things that have been a massive part of my grief journey so far, but also I don't want to just call it a grief journey because it's been a beautiful becoming of who I am turning into in the aftermath of all of that. And as I learn to live and grieve simultaneously, and 100%, I couldn't need closure in order to heal because Riley died without warning. No letter, no nothing. If I needed closure in order for there to be any healing and that healing that facilitates this gaping wound that you're so convinced is going to destroy you, turning into a wound that starts to heal but then becomes a scar. It never leaves you. Grief and the trauma of loss doesn't leave, but it can heal into this scar that remains as a permanent reminder of the love that was. Not as this permanent reminder that you're broken. And it's all about the lens through which we choose to view it. Because when I see that healing forming the scar as a beautiful reminder of what was, I can carry that scar with me quite proudly because I love what was and I'm grateful for what was, but I'm also grateful for and loving towards what is and what will be because I had the ability to let go of needing closure in order for this stuff to happen. I realize that the closure is something I'll never get. And so I'm not going to sabotage myself because of something that's beyond my control. And then they're releasing the story of how it should have been. I think it's one of the biggest traps our ego sets for us is our perception we have of that we have control when we have very little. We can control ourselves and the lens through which we view our life, and in doing so, control a lot of our lived experience and how we experience life because of how we perceive it. But outside of that, very little. You can't control other people. You can't control so much of what happens in life. But yet our ego tricks us into thinking that we can plan life and that we can think we know how it's supposed to go and look and feel and how long people are supposed to stay in our lives. And I know I've mentioned in a previous episode, I believe that we all draw a card before we come here, and it says on here, this is your term, and your term will be what it will be, but you don't ever get to look at it. So you don't know how long you don't know if your time's up today, if it's up in 40 years, if it's next week, and you don't get to show it to anyone, but it's predetermined. So if it's predetermined, then viewing it that way means that we can remove the ego that says that we were supposed to live out our life with Riley and she would have got married and had kids and all this stuff, because if her card always said 15 years, her agreement with this life was to be here for 15 years. So it's releasing that story of how I think and my ego thinks it should have gone, allows me to really be present with everything that her presence here had to offer. Because she came to be love, man. She came to teach people, not just me, about love, about self-love. She held up a mirror to me that helped me love myself in a way I never would have if it wasn't for the opportunity of having the privilege of loving her and having been loved by her. And I know that she did a similar thing for a lot of people, some that might not have even realized that's what was happening. But I get to really absorb the gravity of how powerful her presence here was and the gratitude associated with that, because I'm not stuck in a narrative that says she was shortchanged, we were shortchanged, she should have been here. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't take away the episodes of sadness when I navigate milestones and anniversaries. She should have turned 18 in May. And of course I was hit with all the things that I would have been doing with my daughter when she turned 18, or experiencing going clubbing with her and all these things. And so you're going to have the episodes where you have to process the perception of what is missing, but it's not getting stuck in that narrative, because it literally clocks your success en route to happiness. And then being with what is, instead of resisting what's not, or even instead of resisting what is, just being with it and allowing it to be. Because I had to go back to where she died repeatedly after she died. I had to go back and pack up my unit, and I had to, Kai's unit across the road was concrete floors. It was mid-renovation. There was no bathroom. It needed work, and we had no choice. We had to get some shit done in order for our life to move forward. We could not live in either of those units because she had died there. And so there was an element of choice taken away, and there was a lot of concern from Kai and from my brother-in-law that me having to be in surface. I know I would have mentioned in the episodes, but Riley jumped off my balcony 33 stories in the air with her sisters and I home, and I had to go down and find her. So obviously returning to the building across the road where she had jumped from those heights, and still in such disbelief that this was even possible. No warning, but also when I moved to that unit, it took me about a month to go near the windows because they were floor to ceiling and we were so high, and I don't like heights. So I couldn't get my head around the fact that she had done it in such a savage and traumatic way. And it was not long into these days on repeat that I remember we were walking across, my brother-in-law and I, and he said, "Are you okay?" Because I kept looking up. It was involuntary. I just kept looking up at the height at which she'd jumped from. And I just said to him, it just is. You know what? I just have to... there's no point trying to make it make sense or resist it because it doesn't make sense to my mind. It just is. And I remember the day that we were walking and I verbalized that. It facilitated peace, and I don't mean peace with what I'd been through or peace. I mean a peace that comes when you stop resisting what is. I don't mean that anything was peaceful, but I mean when we resist what is or what's not, we exacerbate our suffering. we prolong it. We just create and facilitate more suffering than is necessary. And then the other thing is trusting that your peace doesn't depend on anyone else staying in your life or changing. You know, I know even in the aftermath of losing Riley, there was so much that felt challenging about where Kai and I would find ourselves in relation to each other, because we initially, our instinct was to just be close. And it turns out when you put your grief and your trauma next to each other, it doesn't lighten the load. It's a lot more like putting a burn near the sun. And we processed our grief in very different ways. And it's interesting because coming from the background and history of clinging so desperately to this perception of permanence or control, and needing a sense of control in order to feel safe, which, let's be real, when I look back, it never actually resulted in that. I never felt safe. That's why I was constantly striving for control, because it was this unattainable thing that I wanted in my life but could not actually achieve. And it's by realizing that you can do you and make your choices. And it's a lot like the book by Mel Robbins. If you have not read the book called Let Them, I would highly recommend it. I think it helped. I think reading that book in my grief definitely helped me trust that my peace doesn't depend on anyone else staying in my life or changing. And that even if things didn't work out with Kai and I in the aftermath of all of this just shit happening in our life and this ugliness to our story, I was going to be okay. And that my capacity for peace and to move on with my life and be happy and find joy didn't rely or depend on him staying in my life or him changing the ways that he was processing his grief or showing up in the aftermath of losing Riley. And there's so much power to that. But to be able to trust that and facilitate this kind of outcome for yourself, it means letting go of our need to control it and our attachment to outcomes and to identity. If I was still so attached to who I thought I was as a person, as a mother, as a partner, as all of these things, I would be in constant turmoil. I actually have no attachment to so much of my life. I love my life, and I believe that I have the capacity to love and enjoy it the way that I do because I've reached a place of freedom from attachment. I love those girls, and I let the genuine love that I have for them drive the motivation I have to show up fully in every interaction that I have, and very consciously. If life has shown me anything, it's that nothing is a given, that I have very little control, and that the things that I do control and that I am accountable and responsible for, I want to take accountability for. I want to act and live intentionally and on purpose. And my goal for my girls is that they would be able to navigate the loss associated with my absence. If I was gone today, if I was gone next year, or I live 45 more years, regardless of when I'm not here, I want them, and I've had this conversation, this is something I'm consciously working on, is them to have more capacity to live in a joyful gratitude for what was than ever overwhelmed by the ego that says it thinks it knows what should have been, because I believe I drew a card and I don't know when my time will be up. But I know that my one wish for those girls is that somehow I can help them get to that place where when they think of me when I am gone, that it brings a smile to their face, that they're so grateful for the way that I showed up and the privilege we had to love each other and to be in each other's lives. I'm watching all these adults lose their parents, and because they had good parents, it's devastating to them, even though the parents live to old age where death it can be expected and should be expected. And they had full and happy and healthy lives. These adult children of theirs are so devastated that by the absence, that they're finding it difficult to even function. And it's making me realize that we have this perception that things are gone, that there's permanence, or a sense of entitlement, if you like, that we're just supposed to have each other all the time. And I'm talking about they had a full life, but I think the better you show up as a parent, the more of a massive hole that tends to leave, because you've got these adult children going, but I just wanted my children to have more of you, and now they're not going to, or I'm now going to have to go without my mum or dad. And I have empathy and compassion for that, but looking at it and the pain that comes with it, it just drives home the need or the value, if you like, of what I'm endeavoring with the girls, is to be more inclined to, instead of get stuck in sadness that my child won't fully know their grandma or whatever, be so grateful for how you get to show up as a mum because you had me as a mum. And so it's all about the lens and the narrative and so forth, because we really don't have the control we like to think we do, the certainty or the permanence that our ego wants us to think. And what I'm talking about achieving, and that freedom from attachment, that's where peace lives. Not in control, but in trusting that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be at this point in my life, and I'm not trying to hold on tighter, but rather let go with love. And it's presence that facilitates that, because if we show up in every interaction in our most authentic form, not taking anything for granted and living with intention and on purpose, then it actually frees us up to experience the most genuine love. So let's talk about what that looks like in real life. I'm talking about, freedom from attachment and letting go and loosening our grip. But if we think about it, our mindset matters most when pain is real, when life has come for us and the challenges are there. And so I think that when we start to reflect on what it is we're actually clinging to, because awareness is such a powerful thing. What are we afraid to lose and why? And it's interesting because I perceived, if I look back and reflect, I was clinging so tightly to my relationship in my younger years, and I'd never felt safe in my life. And the closest thing that I had to safety was the enmeshment and codependency of my relationship. So I deemed the loss of that relationship or the absence of him to be the loss of safety and peace in my life. And so if we start to name the things we're clinging to, we can kind of bring that awareness to what we're actually afraid to lose and why, and how then we can facilitate ourselves getting to a healthier place of relating to whatever it is we're clinging so tightly to. Also looking at just the impermanence of life and reminding ourselves that nothing is permanent. This moment, this feeling, this season, and that's not meant to scare us. It's meant to free us. And I know I wrote this thing in my book about impermanence, and that it's a blessing, not a curse, because if we bring an awareness, a conscious awareness to it as a fact, it facilitates presence. This too shall pass, good, bad, or ugly. It's going to pass. If it's good, enjoy. Don't cling to it like it needs to last longer than it's supposed to, because it's not up to us to determine that. If we show up with the right presence, we get to enjoy it for all that it is. But if we show up free from attachment, we get to let go when it's supposed to end, which also facilitates opening the next door of life that is supposed to bring into our life whatever is to come next, rather than looking back and ignoring all these doors life is opening because we're so stuck looking back at how we thought life was supposed to go. And so it doesn't have to be scary. It can be quite liberating to realize the impermanence is a given in life. And it gives us more of a capacity to really practice owning gratitude, because instead of this is mine or I'm entitled, there's no sense of entitlement in my life. Nothing is a given. I don't know what my life will look like tomorrow. So I'm very, very present and grateful for now. And it brings a mindfulness and an awareness to the lived experience, so that I am actually freer to truly live it. I think so many people end up just, passive participants of their life rather than in the driver's seat, or just backseat bandits that are just on someone else's agenda, not knowing where the fuck they're going to end up, and then filled with resentment when the journey doesn't kind of go the way that they would have liked. I would encourage you to take the driver's seat of your journey, and it's what it looks like from a practical point is living with intention and on purpose, choosing our responses, choosing our mindset, our lens through which we view our life, bringing a really mindful approach to being present, and gratitude will bring you into the present. Gratitude is something that is so valuable because it releases oxytocin and all the love hormones and the feelings of calm and connectedness, and it connects you with the present moment. It really puts you in the now, but it's also something that's incredible because you pull that string of gratitude. You'll never find the end. I would challenge you to try. There is never a point at which you cannot find anything more to be grateful for. There is always something, and those somethings can be tiny things. And if you're convinced you don't have anything to be grateful for, start small. The fact that you're here, the fact that you woke up, the fact that you got out of bed, it's all of those things. The fact that the sun is out, or if it's not, the fact that the rain provides water and we're not in a drought. There's so many things. But again, the other things, when I think about the practical ways I've managed to kind of loosen my grip and need for control, is definitely inner child work, because so much of our attachment is about old fears, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of lack, this conditioning of our nervous system from when we were children. And when we meet those wounds with love, we don't need others to fill them. I don't need somebody else to heal or fix or make better my fear of abandonment. I need to do that work. And especially since I can see how my fear, whatever it is, fear of abandonment or whatever, drives this attachment to outcomes or need for control. And there's no good trying to go, I'm trying to loosen my grip on, this attachment that I feel is necessary, if you're not willing to look inward. If you're not willing to do the work and look at the wounds that need your attention, they very much do, and they need your love and compassion, because you're the only one that can love you as unconditionally and constantly and wholly and beautifully as you're desiring to be loved. And that's also not something that you can give to anyone unless you're giving it to yourself. If you don't have it for yourself, you don't have it to offer others. And so if we are trying to get to a healthier place where we experience this genuine, true love, it really, really starts with us. It has to be something that we work on offering to ourselves. And when you do, it brings about a peace that facilitates letting go. I don't need to control anything. I was so desperately clinging to my relationship in my younger years because I desperately wanted to be loved. I wanted to be worthy. I wanted to be enough. I didn't want to be rejected or abandoned or all of these things. Since in that book that I know I mentioned in a previous episode called Becoming the One, since I did the work to become the one I was looking for so that my need for unconditional love was always met, I am at such a peaceful place where all is well in my world, and romantically I could die happy because I'm dating myself and that need is always met, but I'm also so much freer to love intentionally and we're free from attachment, which is, as it turns out, a really, really genuinely passionate and fulfilling and enjoyable, so much more enjoyable experience than attachment and needing control and trying to cling to someone and trying to be loved. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, check out the episode called Becoming the One and the book, which is available on audio too, so you can listen to it. But it was a game changer for me, and I would highly recommend it to anyone looking to do any inner work. But it's also about affirming within yourself that I release what I can't control and trust in what's meant for me, because it's not up to me or my ego to dictate what my life journey is going to look like or the events in and around my life. There's, as I've mentioned, so much of it that I can't control, but I am 100% accountable and responsible for the parts I can control. And it's in doing that deep dive into what can I control, what am I accountable for, and part of the accountability is in letting go. Not shortchange myself with this lived experience by only experiencing what I know love to be is associated with attachment and control. I'm meant for more than that, and so are you. So here's what I want to leave you with. You are 100% allowed to love deeply, but still let go. You're allowed to grieve and still grow. I know, I'm doing it. And living and grieving simultaneously is actually not the chore that I think my previous version of my grieving self would have seen that as a bit of a chore. I remember in the earlier days being forced back into the caring profession because I was not supported financially to survive the loss of a child. They don't support you. And so I had to go back to work, and it was really at a point where I needed to be cared for. I should not have been forced back into the hospital setting. And I remember stopping, just bawling my eyes out at my brother-in-law's workplace going, "Is this all life is? Just a series of chores until you fucking die?" And that's how I felt. I felt like I was just Groundhog Day, dying a slow death of a broken heart. And now I had to go and be in the caring profession. Are you kidding? It was like just salt on the wound, and that I was just fulfilling chores, paying bills, and just waiting for my body to just pack it in and die. And he said to me, no, you find things to look forward to, you find reasons to be happy, and he couldn't have been more right. And I know if I had even thought about learning to live and grieve simultaneously at that point, in that point of my trauma and the response I was having to it, it would have sounded ridiculous. And now it's just the most incredibly rewarding experience, is the results or reaping what you sow by having the courage to do the work. And I'm loving my life as a result. So you are absolutely capable of living a full and meaningful and joyful life. And our peace doesn't depend on holding everything together. Our peace lives in trusting that we're whole even when life isn't. And it's not about avoiding suffering either. Maybe it's about suffering less because we're not at war with reality anymore. We're not fighting what is and exacerbating our suffering. And maybe, just maybe, when we let go of needing life to be anything other than what it is, we actually set ourselves free. And maybe that's what it is that I've done, Maybe the way that I talk about learning to live and grieve simultaneously and the love that I'm experiencing is a result of the capacity and courage that I had in those early days of grief to be able to go, it just is. I am not going to exacerbate my suffering by staying stuck in denial or fighting the facts. And that was, I believe, in reflecting, the beginning of the letting go of attachment to all of it, everything, because there wasn't any area of my life I wasn't trying to control before. And I think if we're honest and we really do pull back the curtain and expose ourselves to ourselves and be raw and vulnerable about the areas that we feel the need to control, what we do is we gift ourselves the awareness of the areas that need our love and attention, and open ourselves up to the capacity we all have to let go and free ourselves from attachment, and in doing so, learn how to experience a much deeper, more genuine and true love to ourselves and to others. And so I want to thank you again for being here and for listening and for essentially doing this inner work with me, because I believe if you've found me and you're following this and you are actually listening to each episode, then we're on a journey together. And I'm very much enjoying the ride, so I hope that you are. So if this episode stirred something in you, then I want you to share it with someone that's been gripping a little bit too tightly to their life, maybe. Let's remind each other that we can breathe and we can release and we can let go and we can still love, and life can be wild and free instead of caged and needing control. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Eslana Loa. You can follow me on Instagram at Eslana Loa. I very much look forward to sharing everything that I have to offer in the upcoming episodes of the podcast Why Mindset Matters. Thanks again.